there is a small group of herbs that chefs are quietly desperate for. Not basil, not rosemary, not the things every garden center sells in six-packs every spring. These are herbs that almost never make it into supermarkets, that lose their value within hours of being cut, and that restaurants, distilleries, and specialty food producers are actively searching for, often paying far more than most home gardeners would ever guess for something that takes up no more space than a flower pot. The reason most people have never heard of these herbs is simple. They don't survive shipping. They don't store well. They don't fit the supply chain that brings food from large farms to supermarket shelves, which means the only way most chefs and producers can get them fresh is from someone growing them nearby, someone who understands what they have and who to sell it to. Today, I'm going to walk you through 15 of these herbs. Some you may have heard of and never realized were valuable. Some you have probably never encountered at all. Every one of them can be grown in a home garden, and every one of them has a real market of buyers who are actively looking for exactly what a small grower can provide. Stay until number 1, because that herb has a history stretching back to the Bible, was once worth its weight in silver, and is now so rare that a single small harvest can be worth more than almost anything else you could grow in the same space. Welcome to the quiet garden. Let's get into it. 15. Epazote. Epazote is a pungent, distinctive herb central to Mexican cooking, traditionally used in bean dishes, where it's valued both for its flavor, strong, slightly medicinal, somewhere between oregano and petrol, in a way that somehow works perfectly with black beans, and for its traditional reputation for reducing the digestive discomfort associated with eating beans. Fresh epazote is almost impossible to find outside regions with significant Mexican communities, and even there, it's rarely sold commercially because it doesn't store or ship well. The dried version loses much of what makes fresh epazote distinctive. Restaurants serving authentic Mexican cuisine, and there are far more of these than there used to be, across regions that have never had access to fresh epazote, represent a consistent, underserved market. The plant grows easily as an annual in temperate climates, self-seeds readily once established, and produces abundantly from just a few plants. It tolerates poor soil and heat without complaint. For a grower with a relationship to even a handful of restaurants serious about Mexican cooking, fresh epazote sold by the bunch, harvested to order, is a small, reliable, and almost entirely uncontested niche. 14. Shiso. Shiso, also called perilla, is a herb central to Japanese and Korean cuisine, with green and red varieties used for everything from wrapping foods to garnishing sashimi to flavoring pickles, and a flavor profile that combines mint, basil, and something slightly citrus, and almost impossible to describe to someone who hasn't tasted it. Fresh shiso is a premium item even in Japan, where it's grown specifically for sushi restaurants and sold at prices that reflect both its delicate nature. It wilts and discolors quickly after harvest, and the precision required to grow it to the size and quality that high-end kitchens expect. Outside Japan and Korea, fresh shiso is almost entirely absent from the supply chain. Sushi restaurants, Korean restaurants, and chefs experimenting with East Asian flavors have an appetite for it that vastly exceeds availability. The plant grows easily from seed, performs well in a greenhouse or warm garden bed, and the red variety in particular is visually striking enough that it doubles as an ornamental. A grower who can deliver fresh shiso leaves, picked to size, delivered the same day, to even a small number of Japanese and Korean restaurants has access to a market that most of those restaurants have simply given up trying to source locally, because no one has offered to. 13. Sweet Cicely. Sweet Cicely is an old European herb that has almost entirely disappeared from cultivation, despite having one of the more remarkable properties of any plant in the temperate herb garden. Every part of it, the leaves, the stems, the unripe seeds, and the roots, tastes distinctly of anise and is naturally sweet enough that it was traditionally used as a sugar substitute, particularly in tart fruit dishes, long before refined sugar was widely available. The plant was a fixture of medieval and early modern European herb gardens, used to reduce the amount of sugar needed in cooking rhubarb and other sour fruits, and valued by herbalists for its digestive properties. It fell out of cultivation almost entirely once sugar became cheap and widely available, another example of a useful perennial being replaced by a convenient commodity. Today, sweet Sicily is essentially unknown commercially, grown only by specialist herb nurseries and a small number of gardeners who maintain old varieties. For the natural sweetener and flavor market, which has grown significantly as people look for alternatives to refined sugar, sweet Sicily represents a genuinely unique product with almost no commercial supply anywhere. A perennial that returns every year, tolerates shade, and produces a flavor and sweetness combination that exists in essentially no other plant. 12. Curry leaf. Curry leaf, from the curry tree, native to South Asia, is an essential ingredient in South Indian and Sri Lankan cooking, used fresh, fried briefly in oil at the start of cooking to release its distinctive aromatic flavor that has no real substitute. The leaves lose their characteristic aroma and flavor very quickly after picking, and dried curry leaves, the only form available in most supermarkets outside areas with significant South Asian populations, bear almost no resemblance to fresh leaves in terms of flavor impact. This creates a significant gap. South Asian restaurants and home cooks who understand the difference between fresh and dried curry leaves are often working with an inferior product simply because fresh leaves aren't available locally. The curry tree can be grown in a large container in temperate climates, brought indoors over winter, and produces leaves continuously through the growing season once established. For a grower near any community with South Asian restaurants or significant South Asian populations, fresh curry leaves represent one of the more reliable specialty herb markets, a product where the difference between fresh and the available alternative is dramatic, and where the customer base already understands exactly why fresh matters. 11. French tarragon. There are two plants sold as tarragon, and the difference between them matters enormously to anyone who cooks seriously. French tarragon has the refined, anise-like, slightly sweet flavor that defines classic French sauces, particularly béarnaise and the herb blends used in fine dining. Russian tarragon, which looks similar and is far easier and cheaper to grow from seed, has almost none of that flavor, bland, slightly bitter, and a poor substitute that nonetheless gets sold as tarragon in many garden centers. French tarragon cannot be reliably grown from seed. True French tarragon is propagated only from cuttings or root divisions, which makes it significantly more expensive and harder to source than Russian tarragon, and means that many home cooks who think they're growing tarragon are actually growing the inferior Russian variety without realizing it. For chefs who know the difference, and in fine dining that's most of them, a reliable source of true French tarragon, propagated correctly and sold fresh, is valuable specifically because so much of what's commercially available is the wrong plant entirely. It grows well in well-drained soil in full sun, spreading slowly via its root system. An established planting can be divided to produce more plants, true to type, unlike seed-grown tarragon, for years. 10. Sichuan pepper. Sichuan pepper isn't a true pepper at all. It's the dried berry husk of a shrub in the citrus family, and it produces an effect unlike any other spice in the world. A tingling, numbing sensation on the lips and tongue, called mala in Chinese cuisine, that has no real equivalent anywhere else. The shrub xanthoxylum is cold-hardy in many temperate climates, ornamental, and produces clusters of small berries that are harvested and dried to produce the spice. Fresh or recently dried Sichuan pepper has a significantly more potent and complex flavor than the often stale, imported versions sold in most supermarkets. The numbing compounds degrade over time, and with exposure to air, meaning the quality difference between fresh and old Sichuan pepper is dramatic. The growth of Sichuan and broader Chinese regional cuisine in restaurants outside China has created demand for higher quality Sichuan pepper than what's typically available through commodity spice importers. A grower with even a few established xanthic xylem shrubs, which are attractive enough to function as ornamental landscaping in addition to their harvest, can produce a spice that most chefs working with Sichuan cuisine have never had access to in a genuinely fresh form. 9. Grains of paradise. Grains of paradise is a West African spice, small, reddish-brown seeds from a plant related to ginger and cardamom, with a flavor that combines pepper's heat with notes of citrus, cardamom, and a faint floral quality that makes it genuinely distinctive. Historically, grains of paradise were a major trade spice in medieval Europe, valuable enough that the West African coast where they were traded was known to European traders as the Grain Coast. Their importance declined as black pepper became more available through different trade routes, and grains of paradise gradually became obscure outside West Africa. The craft spirits industry has driven a significant revival. Grains of paradise are used in several well-known gin recipes, valued for the specific quality of heat and complexity they bring that black pepper doesn't replicate. Craft distilleries sourcing botanicals for gin, a market we've discussed before on this channel, represent a real and growing buyer base for grains of paradise specifically. The plant requires a warm climate to thrive outdoors, but can be grown in a large container and overwintered indoors in temperate regions, similar to ginger and turmeric. For a grower already supplying botanicals to local distilleries, grains of paradise is a distinctive addition that few other small growers would be offering. 8. Holy basil tulsi. Holy basil, known as tulsi in India, holds a position in Indian culture that goes well beyond cooking. It's considered sacred in Hindu tradition, grown in courtyards and temples, and used in religious ceremonies as well as in Ayurvedic medicine, where it has been used for thousands of years as what would now be called an adaptogen, a substance traditionally believed to help the body adapt to stress. Modern research on tulsi has examined its effects on cortisol levels, blood sugar regulation, and inflammatory markers, with several studies suggesting genuine adaptogenic properties consistent with its traditional use. This research has fueled significant growth in the herbal tea and supplement market, where tulsi has become one of the most sought-after ingredients in the adaptogen category, a category that has expanded dramatically as a part of the broader wellness market. Unlike culinary basil, tulsi has a flavor that's more peppery, clove-like, and complex, distinct enough that it's used primarily for tea rather than cooking in most contexts. It grows similarly to other basil varieties, easily from seed, productively through a warm growing season, and dried tulsi leaves for tea command meaningfully higher prices than common culinary herbs, reflecting the wellness market's willingness to pay for ingredients with a strong traditional and research-backed story. 7. Sumac. Sumac is the dried, ground berries of a shrub that grows wild across much of North America, the Middle East, and parts of Europe, and in the regions where it's used in cooking, particularly across the Middle East. It's an essential souring agent, used in dishes like fattoush and as a key component of za'atar, the herb and spice blend that's become significantly more popular in Western cooking over the last decade. The flavor is tart, almost lemony, but with a depth that lemon juice doesn't provide, and unlike lemon, sumac adds that sourness without adding liquid, making it valuable in dry spice blends and as a finishing seasoning. Most commercial sumac is imported and often of inconsistent quality, sometimes adulterated with other ingredients, sometimes simply old and faded in flavor. Fresh, properly dried sumac from berries harvested at peak ripeness has a brightness that the commercial product frequently lacks. A shrub that produces edible sumac, distinct from poison sumac, which is a different plant entirely and an important distinction for anyone growing or foraging it, grows wild across enormous areas of North America, often considered a weed tree along roadsides and field edges. For a grower who can correctly identify, harvest, and dry sumac berries, the raw material is often already present on the property, completely free, simply unrecognized as anything other than a wild shrub. 6. Lemon verbena. Lemon verbena has one of the most intense, pure lemon fragrances of any plant that exists, far stronger and cleaner than lemon balm, and without the bitterness that lemon zest can sometimes bring to delicate dishes. The herb is prized in high-end pastry and dessert making, where its fragrance can be infused into creams, syrups, and sugars without adding any of the acidity of actual lemon, useful in delicate preparations where acidity would affect texture. It's also highly valued in herbal tea, both on its own and as a component in blends, where dried lemon verbena commands prices significantly higher than common herbal tea ingredients. The plant is a tender perennial in most temperate climates. It needs protection or container growing where winters are cold, but grows vigorously through the warm season, producing abundant fragrant leaves that can be used fresh or dried. The dried leaf retains its fragrance remarkably well compared to many herbs, which makes it particularly suited to the tea and dried herb market. A grower can harvest through the growing season, dry the leaves, and have a product that maintains quality for sale through the months when the plant itself isn't producing, addressing one of the biggest challenges that fresh herb growers usually face. 5. Angelica. Candied angelica stems were once one of the most prized confections in European pastry. Bright green, intensely aromatic, used to decorate cakes, and as an ingredient in fruit cakes and traditional desserts across Britain and continental Europe for centuries. The plant itself is dramatic, a giant biennial that can reach 6 feet or more, with hollow stems and an intense, complex aroma somewhere between celery, juniper, and musk. The candying process is genuinely labor-intensive, involving repeated boiling and soaking in sugar syrup over several days, which is precisely why candied angelica all but disappeared from commercial production as labor costs rose. It became uneconomical for large-scale confectionery production, even as demand from artisan and high-end pastry chefs continued. Beyond candying, angelica root and seeds are significant botanicals in the craft spirits industry. Angelica root is a traditional ingredient in many gin recipes and in vermouth, valued for the specific earthy, slightly bitter complexity it adds. The plant grows in cool, moist conditions, tolerates partial shade, and self-seeds readily once established, though it typically takes 2 years to flower and produce the seeds and roots most valued by distillers. For a grower willing to produce candied angelica by hand, a genuinely old-world skill that very few people maintain, or to supply fresh angelica root and seed to craft distilleries, this is a botanical with almost no current domestic supply, and a real, if niche, market on both fronts. 4. Galangal. Galangal is a rhizome closely related to ginger, essential to Thai, Indonesian, and broader Southeast Asian cooking, with a flavor that's sharper, more citrusy, and more piney than ginger, distinctive enough that ginger cannot properly substitute for it in dishes like Thai curry pastes, where galangal is foundational. Fresh galangal is significantly harder to find than fresh ginger outside areas with substantial Southeast Asian populations, and dried or powdered galangal, the most commonly available form elsewhere, loses much of the bright, citrusy quality that makes fresh galangal valuable in the first place. The plant grows similarly to ginger and turmeric, in containers in temperate climates, requiring warmth and humidity to thrive, overwintered indoors where winters are cold, producing a harvestable rhizome that increases each year it's allowed to grow. For Thai and Southeast Asian restaurants outside the regions where galangal grows naturally, fresh galangal is often simply unavailable, with dried substitutes used by default because nothing better exists locally. A grower who can supply fresh galangal, even in modest quantities, to restaurants that have never had access to it, represents exactly the kind of gap that small-scale specialty growing is positioned to fill. 3. Mastic. Mastic is a resin harvested from a specific variety of the mastic tree, a relative of pistachio, that grows almost exclusively on the Greek island of Chios, where its cultivation and harvest have been protected and controlled for centuries. At one point in history, mastic was so valuable that unauthorized harvesting on Chios was punishable by death under Ottoman rule. The resin is harvested by making small cuts in the bark and collecting the hardened sap as it weeps out over weeks, a labor-intensive process that has remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years. Mastic has a unique, slightly piney, resinous flavor used in Greek and Middle Eastern cooking, in ice cream, in bread, in a traditional chewing gum that gave the English word masticate its origin, and in traditional medicine across the Mediterranean and Middle East for digestive complaints, with modern research examining its effects on certain digestive bacteria. The geographic restriction on mastic production, the specific climate and soil conditions of Chios, are considered essential to the resin's characteristic properties, means that almost all mastic in the world comes from a single source, and supply has never kept pace with the growing interest in Mediterranean ingredients in cooking and wellness products outside Greece. While replicating Chios's exact conditions elsewhere is unrealistic, the mastic tree itself can be grown in suitable Mediterranean-type climates, and even small-scale production of a resin, this restricted in origin, and this historically significant, represents one of the most genuinely rare botanical products that could be produced outside its traditional source. 2. Chervil. Chervil is sometimes called the gourmet's parsley, a delicate, lacy herb with a flavor that combines parsley with a subtle anise sweetness, central to French cooking, particularly in the classic herb blend finds herbs alongside parsley, chives, and tarragon. What makes chervil genuinely difficult to source commercially is how quickly it deteriorates after cutting. Within hours, the delicate leaves wilt and lose much of their flavor, making it almost impossible to transport any meaningful distance and have it arrive in usable condition. This is a herb that essentially must be grown close to where it's used. Chervil is also a cool season herb that bolts quickly in heat, meaning a single planting has a relatively short productive window, but it grows quickly from seed, and successive small plantings every few weeks through spring and autumn can provide a continuous supply through the cooler parts of the growing season. For chefs who value fine herbs and the specific quality that fresh chervil brings, used at the very end of cooking, never cooked, added for its delicate aroma alone, a local source that can deliver it within hours of cutting solves a problem that almost no commercial supply chain can address. It is, in many ways, the perfect specialty crop for proximity-based selling, valuable specifically because distance destroys it. 1. Spikenard. Spikenard is mentioned in the Bible in one of its most emotionally significant scenes. In the Gospel of John, Mary anoints Jesus' feet with a pound of pure spikenard, described as so valuable that Judas objects to what he considers a wasteful extravagance, estimating its worth at a full year's wages for a laborer. The plant, Nardistachys jatamansi, is native to the high-altitude regions of the Himalayas, growing at elevations above 3,000 meters in Nepal, Bhutan, and parts of India and China. The root produces an intensely aromatic oil that was traded across the ancient world along routes connecting the Himalayas to the Mediterranean, a trade so extensive that a plant growing only in remote mountain regions ended up in a story set in Judea, carried across thousands of miles by traders who understood exactly what it was worth. Spikenard has been used in Ayurvedic medicine for thousands of years, traditionally for its calming, sedative properties, and modern research has examined compounds in spikenard oil for effects on anxiety, sleep, and inflammation, with some studies suggesting genuine pharmacological activity consistent with its traditional use. The plant is now considered vulnerable in parts of its native range due to overharvesting of wild populations for the oil trade, a familiar pattern by now, of a plant so valuable for its properties that the wild populations supplying that value have been depleted. Spikenard can be cultivated slowly, and only in conditions that mimic its high-altitude native habitat, cool temperatures, good drainage, and protection from intense heat. It's not a plant for every garden, and it's not a fast crop, but for a grower in a suitable cool climate, willing to take on a genuinely rare botanical with a documented history stretching back 2,000 years, a history of being valued at a year's wages, and a modern market driven by both aromatherapy and ongoing research into its properties. Spikenard represents one of the rarest and most storied plants that could realistically be grown at all. A plant valuable enough to anoint the feet of Christ, still growing in a handful of remote mountain valleys and in a small number of gardens that have figured out how to coax it into life somewhere else. 15 herbs. 15 gaps between what the world is quietly looking for and what almost nobody is growing. What connects every single one of these is the same thing: distance. Distance from where these plants grow naturally to where they're needed. Distance in time between harvest and use, which most of these herbs cannot survive. And distance in knowledge, between the chefs, distillers, and specialty buyers who know exactly what they're looking for, and the growers who could be supplying it but have never thought to. None of these require acres. None of these require special licenses or enormous investment. What they require is the decision to grow something specific, to learn who actually wants it, and to close the gap between a garden and a kitchen that's been searching for exactly what that garden could provide. If one of these herbs caught your attention, look into the market in your area before you plant, find out who would actually buy it, and how much they'd pay before you commit a season to growing it. That single piece of research is often the difference between a herb that sits unused and one that becomes a genuine, if small, source of income. Let me know in the comments which of these you'd grow first. And if you haven't subscribed to The Quiet Garden yet, this is what we do here. Find the gaps, find the knowledge, and find what's been growing in plain sight the whole time. See you in the next one.
So hello guys, this is Raman and welcome to our channel The Quick Garden, where we will post the videos about weeds, plants and everything. So hope you will like the every video being posted in this channel, and thank you so much.